I apologize if I sound kind of nasally during this video. I don't know what's going on with me. But anyway, with the smashing success of the new Kickstarter, it seems as though Death Battle's making a damn good comeback. And a lot of people are really excited for it, myself included. And of course, when people get excited for, a new Death Battle season or more episodes, people are quick to talk about what they want to see the most. Their most wanted Death Battle matchups. Often you'll hear people say stuff like, oh, I want Chucky vs. Springtrap to happen next season, or Gogeta vs. Omnimon, or hell, if you even have a British guy in the room, you'll probably hear him say Shinoa vs. Gordo. Hell, I'm not an exception to this having most wanteds. Some of my most wanteds are Scourge vs. Albedo, Rosaria vs. Valentine, Darth Maul vs. Black Manta, all of which are pretty cool matchups in my opinion. I know those are kind of iffy ones to some people, but for me, I like them. I might make a most wanted episodes video sometime later down the line, but for now, that's not what we're talking about. Instead, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite matchups that I don't want to see on the show. Now, for some people, that might sound a little confusing. How is this your favorite matchup, but you don't want to see it on a show? Well, let me talk about the matchup and explain my reasoning as to why I don't want to see this on Death Battle. So without further ado, let's reveal the matchup.
How the fuck did Lee Sands get here?
Now that's more like it. But Zero, I hear you ask, who are these characters? What's the connections? What's the dynamic look like? And who's that handsome devil on the left? As for who these characters are, we have Miles Dread from the 2013 Max Steel reboot series, going up against the Shredder from the 2012 TMNT series. Connections are as follows. Both of the main antagonists are early 2010s 3D animated reboot series. They're both wealthy and powerful leaders of an organization, Shredder being the leader of the Foot Clan and Miles Dread being the founder of THI. Both are clad in some form of armor and predominantly fight in hand-to-hand combat, though on occasion using some ranged weapons. There is some instances where Shredder uses ranged attacks and Miles Dread uses energy blasts. Both have sought to collect a form that is alien in origin, turbo energy and mutagen, and they've used these materials to power themselves up, undergoing a transformation in the process. Shredder used mutagen to become the Super Shredder, and meanwhile, Miles Dread needs turbo energy to survive, and unlocks more powerful forms the more he absorbs. These transformations of the two end up enlarging their body mass, greatly increasing their physical power, yet they seem to be driven mad by it and warped their minds, taking away some rational thought. They've both collaborated with extraterrestrial beings on multiple occasions. Shredder and the Krang, Dread and the various Ultralinks he's teamed up with in the past. Both have hired lackeys, of which would end up becoming mutated in some form during the process of completing their tasks. This happens to Shredder's lackeys multiple times, particularly with Fishface and Dog Pound, and in Dread's case, he hired Troy Winter, who became infused with an Ultralink and became Extroyer. Both have a rough past involving the protagonist's father/father figures. Shredder, being brothers and rivals, turned enemies with Hamato Yoshi, who later became Splinter, whereas Miles Dread co-founded N-Tech with Jim McGrath. Both would blame them for the things that happened to them damaging their bodies, even though it was really their own fault. Shredder blaming Splinter for the death of Tang Shen as well as his burning, despite being the one who killed her and caused the fire in the dojo that night, whereas Dread said that Jim is who made him the man he is today, when in reality, Dread was the one who caused the turbo energy siphoning device to fuse with him due to his own greed. And finally, both usually end up sending others to do the dirty work for them, but on occasion show up themselves and end up proving to be one of the biggest challenges for the protagonists. As for the dynamic, I could totally see it being nothing too crazy. Shredder would probably just approach Dread with his superior martial arts skills and try to counteract Miles Dread's recklessness, because Shredder not only relies on his strength, but he also relies on his superior skills. Something that Dread doesn't exactly have, but he makes up for it with his vast amounts of power. And then, sometime during the fight, they'd find sources of their power-ups and use them to evolve in some way, and then just kind of go nuts from there. So, I've shown you the characters, I've given you the connections, and I've given my thoughts on what the dynamic could possibly look like. So, with all that being pretty solid, why do I not want it on Death Battle? Hell, I even made a trailer for it, so what gives? Well, for me, it boils down to 3 particular reasons. These 3 reasons are big enough to where they can't be ignored when discussing the possibility of Shredder vs. Dredd as an episode. Now, keep in mind when I'm making these points, I am not Death Battle. I can't speak for the entire team. I'm mostly going off my personal guesswork and assumptions. If somebody on the Death Battle team is somehow watching this video and they want to make this episode happen, by all means, go for it. I will not stop you. I just don't think it could happen. My first reason for not wanting this as an episode is the lack of available resources on Miles Dredd. Now, Shredder has a lot to work with in terms of animation potential. He's got various sprites from various video games across the years, and he has various 3D models you could use. The same cannot be said about Miles Dredd. I don't think he has any publicly available sprites or 3D models available for the public to use. And if they do exist, they're probably the most low quality things you can find. And I know you can make custom sprites for Miles Dredd. Having Miles Dredd versus Shredder in a 2D scenario feels like an injustice to me, given the fact that both versions of these characters are from their 3D animated series. And as for the potential argument of, oh, well, they can just make a custom 3D model. They did that for Spider-Gwen versus Batgirl, so why can't they do that here? The reason for that is simple. There's a lot of transformations that they would need to do for Dredd in order to do the character justice. So having multiple 3D custom models made would definitely put a dent in the budget, and considering Death Battle is completely indie now, I don't see them doing that solely because of how badly that could impact their budget. Another reason I have for not wanting this matchup is because of how one-sided it is. One of the best things about Death Battle is its debate aspect. That's kind of the root of the show anyway. And pretty consistently, Miles Dredd should scale to Max Steel, who's large planet level and potentially even star level, depending on how you interpret one of Steel's statements. Shredder is not getting to that level. At best, the 2012 version of Shredder, which is the version of Shredder that this matchup focuses on, is roughly large building, maybe city block, I don't know. But overall, he's not that strong, especially not in comparison to Miles Dredd. If you really look at this matchup and look into the scaling behind it, the matchup is literally just Hydrogen Bomb versus Coughing Baby. And I know that they've done mostly one-sided episodes before, but the problem with that is that they're mostly gag episodes. Those episodes in particular being Deadpool versus The Mask, or Saitama versus Popeye, or SpongeBob versus Super Friends Aquaman. Those matchups are inherently jokey in nature, even if you just take a look at the matchups themselves. Deadpool vs. The Mask is kind of a joke because they wrote it as an episode specifically to kill Deadpool off once and for all. As phenomenal of an episode Saitama vs. Popeye is, it can't be denied that it's also kind of a joke matchup in its nature. Just take a look at the episode as well as just the matchup itself. It doesn't really make any sense, but they did it anyway. It's a one-sided fight, so it's kind of a joke episode. And for those of you who have seen SpongeBob vs. Super Friends Aquaman, you should already be well aware that that was kind of a joke episode that they did for shits and giggles. The only exception to this I can think of is Omni-Man vs. Homelander, which is one of the most blatantly obvious outcomes for a Death Battle episode in the entire series. But I don't know if they would be willing to do something like that again for the sake of Miles Dredd versus the Shredder. And last but not least, we have arguably the most important thing against Miles Dredd versus Shredder happening as an episode. That being the lack of Miles Dredd's recognizability. I know that Death Battle has done obscure episodes in the past, but this feels kind of more drastic. To me, anyway. Now, let's say I were to walk up to someone and I showed them a picture of the Shredder. 9 times out of 10, they're going to be like, oh yeah, that's the Shredder from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Yeah, I know them. But if I were to do the same thing, but replace Shredder with Miles Dread, they're going to be like, is that fucking Omega from Fortnite? Now, you could make the argument that Shredder could be enough to carry the views for the episode. The problem with that is, if Shredder needs to carry views for an episode, why not just go for a popular matchup like Shredder versus Ra's al Ghul? And not to mention the fact that we're probably never going to get Max Steel on the show again if Generator Rex versus Max Steel even happens at all. I just can't see Miles Dread coming to the show at all, because Max Steel feels like one of those franchises where you only really need to do one episode and yeah, you're kind of done with it. But yeah, overall those are my thoughts on why I don't want Miles Dread versus the Shredder to happen as a Death Battle episode. Again, Death Battle is free to do whatever the hell they want. I'm not in charge of Death Battle. But those reasons that I brought up convince me that I don't want to see it on that show. If any Versus show is willing to do it, though, I won't stop them at all. I'd actually be really happy as the matchup's creator. But as it stands, I don't really want it to happen. So, yeah. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Stay safe, stay hydrated, tell your friends and family you love them, and I'll see you all on the flip side. Peace out.